What happens when a successful CEO goes undercover and faces discrimination in his own store? It was a quiet Saturday morning just after 10 a.m. when Terence Hall adjusted the brim of his baseball cap in the rearview mirror. The man staring back at him was barely recognizable. Gone was the CEO who had built a multi-million-dollar retail empire. In his place was just another face in the crowd, a man in a plain hoodie and jeans, a far cry from the tailored suits that normally defined his days. Today wasn't about boardrooms or profit margins. It was about stepping into his own world unannounced to see it through the eyes of a stranger. Terence had always believed in the power of connection. His company was built on the promise that every customer mattered, no matter their background. But recently, whispers of complaints had started to surface, rumors of poor service, bias, and a lack of care from his staff. If there was truth to these claims, he needed to know, not as the boss, but as someone living it. The store in question sat just outside Dallas, Texas, in a busy suburban plaza. It wasn't the flagship location or the top-performing store in his chain, but it held significance. This was the first store Terence had opened outside his home state, a gamble that had paid off handsomely. He'd visited countless times in its early days, but now, years later, he couldn't help but wonder, had the warmth and inclusivity he'd envisioned stayed intact? Terence parked his car and took a deep breath. A rush of anticipation mixed with unease settled over him. He was about to walk into the unknown, shedding the safety net of his title to see if his values still held weight at the foundation of his business. The truth, however uncomfortable, was something he owed to himself and to every person who walked through those doors. As he stepped into the bustling parking lot, the sun cast sharp reflections off the windshields of nearby vehicles. Adjusting the strap of his weathered canvas bag, Terence reminded himself, today, he wasn't CEO Terence Hall. He was just another customer. The storefront gleamed in the sunlight, its logo bold and familiar. Pride swelled in his chest as he approached the automatic doors. This was his creation, a vision turned reality. But pride quickly gave way to focus as he crossed the threshold. The store hummed with activity. Shoppers pushed carts laden with goods, children's voices rose and fell in excitement near the toy aisle, and employees in uniform moved with purpose. To the untrained eye, everything seemed to run like clockwork, but Terence wasn't here to glance over the surface. He was here to dig deeper. He paused near a display of brightly colored kitchen appliances, taking in his surroundings. A young woman in a striped uniform jacket chatted with a customer about product features. A stock associate rearranged items on a nearby shelf, his movements efficient but detached. And at the far end of the store, a younger man leaned against the counter of the electronics section, idly scrolling on his phone. Terence decided to head in that direction. Wandering through the aisles, he picked up a pair of headphones, turning them over in his hands as though considering a purchase. It was a test, simple yet telling. Would this employee approach him, offer assistance, a smile, anything? But nothing came. The young man barely glanced up from his phone, let alone acknowledged his presence. Terence waited, giving the employee every opportunity to engage. Still, nothing. He felt an uncomfortable knot form in his stomach. Maybe the employee was busy. Maybe he hadn't noticed. Terence moved on, scanning the aisles, observing interactions. In the home goods section, he overheard a conversation that stopped him in his tracks. Two employees, both young and casually leaning against a shelf, were engaged in a hushed but unmistakably disrespectful exchange. "That guy over there," one of them said, jerking his head subtly in Terence's direction, "is probably just here to browse. People like him never buy anything big." The other employee chuckled. "Yeah, he doesn't look like he's got the cash for this stuff. Probably just wasting time." It was a gut punch. They didn't know who he was. To them, he was just another black man walking around a store, someone they assumed couldn't afford the items he was looking at. The casual nature of their conversation, the ease with which they dismissed him, spoke volumes. It wasn't just one bad employee. It was a culture that had somehow allowed these attitudes to fester. Terence stayed quiet, resisting the urge to confront them then and there. Instead, he moved toward the checkout area, determined to gather as much insight as he could before addressing the issue. At the register, he found a middle-aged black woman ringing up customers with a kind, professional demeanor. Her name tag read Denise. Terence watched as she greeted each person with a smile, her voice steady and warm. When his turn came, she looked up and smiled. "Did you find everything okay?" "Not exactly," Terence replied, his tone measured. "But I think I'll hold off for now." Denise's smile faltered slightly, but she nodded. "Well, if you need anything, just let us know. We're here to help." Her sincerity was genuine, and for a moment it eased the weight on Terence's chest. It was clear that not everyone in this store shared the same dismissive attitude, but it also highlighted the inconsistency. Why were some employees so welcoming while others were so blatantly biased? As Terence walked out of the store, he couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at play, and he knew it was time to confront the truth head on. Back in his car, Terence sat in silence, gripping the steering wheel tightly. This business, his pride and joy, was supposed to represent opportunity, fairness, and respect. Yet the experiences he just had painted a different picture, one he wasn't prepared for but couldn't ignore. The dismissive behavior from the electronics employee lingered in his mind, but it was the casual comments he overheard in the home goods section that cut the deepest. These weren't isolated incidents. They hinted at a deeper issue within his company's culture, one that had gone unchecked. He thought back to the early days of the business, when he personally trained every manager and hired staff based on shared values. Back then, he'd emphasized the importance of treating every customer like family, regardless of who they were or how much they spent. But as the company grew, those personal touches became harder to maintain. Delegation was necessary, but had it come at the cost of the values he'd worked so hard to instill? Terence couldn't help but wonder if he'd grown too distant from the day-to-day operations. Success had brought expansion, but it had also created blind spots. Were managers fostering an environment of respect, or were they turning a blind eye to subtle prejudices and unprofessionalism? Had he failed to equip his employees with the tools to combat bias and treat everyone equally? He took a deep breath, his mind replaying the interactions from earlier. Denise, the kind cashier, had been a reminder of what his business should stand for. Yet employees like her were being overshadowed by those who didn't share her values. It wasn't just about the customer experience. It was about the culture he had allowed to take root. Terence reached for his notebook and jotted down his thoughts. This wasn't just about fixing one store. It was about ensuring that every employee in every location understood the responsibility of representing his brand. It was about accountability from the top down. But before he could rebuild, Terence knew there was one more step to take, a step that would reveal just how deep the problem ran and challenge those at the heart of it. Terence walked back into the store with a quiet determination. He wasn't here to create a scene or publicly shame anyone. This wasn't about ego. It was about addressing a culture that had gone astray. He headed toward the customer service desk and asked to speak with the store manager. After a few moments, a man in his late 40s approached. His name tag read Brian, and his demeanor was professional but slightly wary. "How can I help you today?" he asked. Terence extended a hand. "Terence Hall," he said, watching as Brian's eyes widened in recognition. "I'm the owner of this store." The manager's composure faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "Mr. Hall, it's an honor to meet you. If I'd known you were visiting—" Terence held up a hand to stop him. "That's the point, Brian. You weren't supposed to know. I came here as a regular customer to see how things are really running. And what I saw today, it wasn't good." Brian's face reddened slightly. "I'm sorry to hear that. Can you tell me what happened?" Terence recounted the events of the day, the indifference from the electronics employee, the overheard comments, and the stark differences in how customers were treated. He spoke calmly but firmly, his words carrying the weight of disappointment. "This isn't just about one bad employee," he said. "It's about a culture that allows this kind of behavior to exist. I've built this company on the idea that every customer deserves respect, regardless of who they are. Today, I saw the opposite of that." Brian shifted uncomfortably. I wasn't aware of these issues. I've always tried to ensure our team follows the company's values." Terence nodded. "I believe you. But clearly, something is slipping through the cracks. And it's not just your responsibility, it's mine too. Somewhere along the way, I've let the values I built this company on get diluted. That ends today." He asked Brian to gather the staff for an impromptu meeting in the break room. Within minutes, the employees were assembled, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Terence stood before them, no longer just another customer, but the leader they didn't expect to see. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Terence Hall. I'm the founder and CEO of this company. And today, I came here undercover to see how things are running on the ground." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Terence took a moment to look at each face before continuing. "What I saw today was troubling. Some of you showed kindness and professionalism, the kind of attitude this company was built on. But others failed to meet even the most basic standard of respect. And that failure isn't just on you, it's on me for not ensuring our culture stays consistent." He turned toward the young electronics employee, who now looked pale and nervous. "You dismissed me, ignored me, and made it clear I wasn't worth your time. That's unacceptable. But even worse, I overheard 2 employees speaking about me, making assumptions about who I am and what I could afford based on nothing more than a glance." The tension in the room was palpable, but Terence kept his tone measured. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm here to fix this. Because if we don't treat every customer with respect, we fail. And I won't let this company fail." But as he stood there, watching their expressions shift from shock to reflection, Terence knew this was only the beginning of the changes he needed to make.